I took a slow, steady breath as the soft desert air brushed against my cheeks, carrying with it the gentle warmth of the late afternoon sun. The world around me felt unusually still, as if the vast expanse of sand stretching endlessly in every direction had decided, just for a moment, to hold its breath with me. I let my shoulders relax as I watched the golden dunes ripple under the faint breeze, moving almost imperceptibly, as though the desert itself was drifting into a quiet slumber. I had come here alone, walking slowly across an ancient landscape that seemed untouched by time, following a path that wasn't truly a path at all, just a faint memory on a worn map, passed down through distant hands and forgotten histories. The map suggested that somewhere far beyond the rolling dunes, somewhere beneath layers of shifting sand and centuries of silence, there lay a lost city, a city no one alive had ever seen. But I wasn't here to uncover treasures or unravel ancient secrets in the way archaeologists might. I came here seeking something quieter, something more personal, a slow journey, a peaceful wandering, a chance to listen to the whispers of a land that had been forgotten by the world. Everything around me felt calm, almost dreamlike. The desert stretched outward like a soft, warm ocean of sand, the light falling gently across its surface. Each step I took pressed lightly into the dune beneath me, creating a small, temporary mark before the wind slowly erased my presence. It felt as though I was walking across a place that did not mind my arrival, but did not need to remember it either. The sun hovered low above the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert floor. I paused for a moment and watched the way the dunes glowed with a deep, honey-like gold, their curves smooth and graceful beneath the fading light. The breeze brushed past again, carrying tiny grains of sand that tapped softly against my clothing, creating a gentle, delicate sound, almost like the faint rustle of pages turning in an ancient book. I tightened the light scarf around my neck and took another slow step forward. My journey had only just begun, yet the world already felt serene, soothing, silent, and endlessly calm. I continued walking, letting my mind drift as the desert opened before me like a quiet, empty canvas. The air smelled faintly of dust and sun-warmed earth. In the distance, heat shimmered along the horizon in soft waves, making the dunes appear to sway gently, as though breathing. I allowed myself to close my eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth settle into my skin, listening to the faint hum of the desert wind. When I opened my eyes again, the landscape seemed even larger than before. The sky above me was a smooth gradient of pale gold melting into soft blue, and tiny early evening stars were just beginning to appear like faint silver needles stitching themselves into the fabric of the sky. I felt a quiet sense of awe, accompanied by a calmness I had not felt in a long time. I had spent months preparing for this journey, studying the map, gathering supplies, learning how to move safely across shifting sands. Yet nothing had prepared me for the profound stillness of standing alone in this vast desert. It felt as if the world had slowed down just for me, inviting me to take my time, to move gently, to breathe deeply. With each step, the sand shifted softly beneath my boots, creating a rhythmic, whisper-like crunch that blended harmoniously with the faint wind. I walked without hurry, letting my thoughts wander freely, imagining the civilization that had once lived here. I wondered what their days had been like, what they had seen when they stepped outside their homes, what sounds had filled their evenings. Most of all, I wondered how a place could disappear so completely, how an entire city could slip beneath the dunes as though swallowed by sleep. As the sun dipped lower, the sky deepened into a richer shade of blue. Shadows stretched farther, softening the shapes of the dunes. I felt the temperature begin to fall gently against my skin, a cooling touch after the warmth of the day. I stopped near the crest of a particularly tall dune and slowly lowered myself to sit down, letting the soft sand embrace me. From this height, the desert looked even more infinite. Waves of sand rolled outward in every direction, rising and falling in quiet rhythm, each dune glowing faintly in the dim light. The horizon was a smooth, gentle line separating golden earth from deepening sky. I rested my hands on the warm sand and felt it slowly cooling beneath my fingers. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply, letting the calmness of the landscape seep into me. The desert had a way of quieting the mind. Its simplicity, its stillness, its lack of distraction. There were no trees whispering in the wind, no distant sounds of water, no rustling of animals, only the soft movement of air and the faint shifting of sand. After a few minutes, I stood again, brushing the grains from my hands. The last rays of sunlight cast an amber glow across the dunes, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The lost city I sought might have been buried for centuries, but the desert itself still remembered hints of where it once stood. My map showed a cluster of low hills somewhere far ahead. They were difficult to see in the fading light, but I could just make out darker shapes rising faintly against the evening sky. According to the notes written beside the drawing, the hills marked the beginning of the ancient settlement. I took a small sip of water, savoring the coolness as it slid down my throat, then tightened the straps of my small pack. Ahead of me lay several hours of walking, but the pace didn't matter. I wanted this journey to be slow, restful, filled with the gentle rhythm of steps and breath. With the sun now slipping completely below the horizon, I continued walking toward the distant hills. The sky deepened into twilight, soft shades of indigo and violet stretching far above me. A crescent moon appeared, hanging delicately in the sky like a thin golden brushstroke. The night wind was cooler now, brushing against my arms and carrying with it the faint scent of the ancient land. I let my fingers drift lightly across the surface of the sand as I walked, feeling the silky texture glide between my hands. The world around me felt peaceful and familiar, even though I had never walked this desert before. As darkness settled, the stars brightened overhead. Without city lights to dim them, they appeared sharp and clear, forming patterns across the sky like silent guides. I looked up at them often, letting their distant glow comfort me. I walked slowly, listening to my own footsteps, to the hush of the desert, to the tiny grains of sand whispering with each movement. The map tucked safely in my pocket felt warm from my body heat, its edges worn from many readings. It was old, unclear in places, but something about it had always felt right, as though it carried a quiet truth waiting for someone patient enough to follow it. Hours passed without my noticing. Sometimes I paused to rest, sitting on the side of a dune and watching the stars. Other times, I simply closed my eyes and breathed, feeling the cool night air settle gently into the desert around me. The silence grew deeper, more comforting as the world turned dark. Eventually, I saw the faint outline of the first hill rising against the night sky. It wasn't tall, more of a long mound of rock and hardened sand, but it stood distinctly apart from the dunes, as though marking the beginning of something intentionally placed long ago. I approached it slowly, my steps soft and measured. As I neared the base of the hill, the sand beneath my boots grew firmer, mixed with small pebbles and fragments of stone. I knelt and picked up a smooth, rounded piece, rubbing it gently between my fingers. It felt old, older than anything I had touched in a long time. I stood again and continued toward the hill. The wind grew softer here, more muted, as though the land was cradling itself beneath the night. The air felt cooler still, settling against my skin like a gentle veil. When I reached the foot of the hill, I paused and looked around. The desert behind me stretched endlessly in silence, while the hill before me rose calmly, waiting. I placed my hand on its surface, feeling the coolness of the stone beneath my palm. Somewhere beyond this hill, beneath layers of sand and centuries of forgotten time, the lost city was sleeping, waiting quietly in the dark. And tomorrow, at first light, I would begin searching for it. I remained at the foot of the low hill for a while, letting the calm of the night settle fully around me. The desert was growing colder, but not sharply, just enough for the warmth of the day to withdraw slowly, like a soft blanket being lifted away layer by layer. I pulled my scarf a little closer to my neck and allowed myself a few quiet breaths. Everything felt peaceful, suspended, as though time itself had exhaled and chosen to rest. Behind me, the dunes stretched out under the moonlight, each curve softened by the gentle glow. Ahead of me, the rocky rise of the hill promised the beginning of something different, something ancient and quietly waiting beneath the surface. I took a step toward it, feeling the texture of the ground change slightly under my boots. The air held a deeper stillness here, a kind of silence that felt purposeful, almost protective. I began to climb slowly, placing my feet carefully on the uneven stones. The incline was gentle, and the soft night breeze brushed against me with each step. As I ascended, I glanced back once more at the vast sweep of the desert. The moon lit the sands so delicately that they almost looked like pale, silver waves frozen in place. The sky above them shimmered with stars, each one quietly pulsing like a distant heartbeat. It was beautiful in a way I had never experienced, quiet, infinite, comforting. At the top of the hill, the landscape changed subtly. The dunes gave way to patches of exposed stone and hardened earth. Faint shapes, too symmetrical to be natural, rose gently from the ground. I knelt beside one of them, brushing my fingertips over its surface. The stone was smoother than I expected, worn down by centuries of wind and sand. It reminded me of the edge of an old step, the kind one might find at the entrance to a long-forgotten building. I lowered my hand and closed my eyes for a moment. I tried to imagine the people who might have walked here centuries ago. Perhaps they had climbed this very hill at dawn or dusk, watching the desert change colors the way I had. Perhaps they had brought water or food in clay jars, or carried baskets filled with woven cloth, or paused to rest beneath a shaded canopy that no longer existed. I felt a faint connection to them, not through anything mystical, but through the simple idea that human footsteps, once upon a time, had moved across the same earth beneath me. Opening my eyes again, I stood and walked toward another shape half buried in the ground. It was a low stone wall, about knee-height, stretching a few paces before disappearing beneath the sand. I traced its length with slow steps, noting the careful arrangement of the stones. Even though they were worn and weathered, they still held a sense of intention, proof that hands had placed them here long ago. The night air carried a soft hum, not quite a sound, more like the feeling of emptiness resonating gently across the desert. I sat on a low wall, letting its cool surface support my weight. The sand around me shifted slightly as the breeze passed, tiny grains sliding against one another with a calming whisper. Somewhere in the dark distance, I heard the faint rustle of a desert animal, perhaps a fox or a small nocturnal bird settling into its nest among the rocks. The sound was brief, quiet, and then the desert fell still again. I wrapped my arms loosely around my knees and looked toward the horizon, imagining the city that might lie somewhere beneath these sands. I knew that tomorrow I would begin searching more thoroughly. I would walk the perimeter of these hills, examine the ground, and look for signs, patterns, lines, textures, anything that hinted at walls, roads, or foundations buried beneath the surface. But for tonight, I simply wanted to sit here and breathe in the soft night air. After a while, I rose again and continued walking along the ridge of the hill. The stones beneath my feet shifted slightly, but they felt solid, much more permanent than the sand dunes behind me. I could see faint outlines of more structures, a corner of a wall, the edge of a buried platform, the remains of what might have once been a small courtyard. Nothing was clear enough to be identified, but everything carried a familiar quietness, as though these fragments were simply waiting patiently for someone to come and listen. I descended gently to the other side of the hill, where the terrain sloped back into softer sand. The moon cast a pale glow across the valley below, revealing a series of shallow depressions scattered irregularly across the ground. At first glance, they looked like natural dips in the sand, but as I walked closer, their roundness and spacing seemed too deliberate to be formed by chance. I approached one of the depressions and knelt beside it. The sand here was finer, almost silky, slipping smoothly between my fingers. I dug gently, pushing aside a thin layer of grains. Beneath them, my fingertips brushed against stone, flat, cool, and unmistakably shaped by human hands. I let the sand run from my palm and watched it catch the moonlight as it fell softly back into the depression. A quiet thrill, not excitement, but a soft, deep stirring, moved through me. The lost city was not just a myth or a memory from an old map. It was here, beneath the sand, waiting. I stood again, brushing the grains from my hands. The breeze shifted slightly, brushing my hair back from my face. The air smelled faintly of stone and dryness, a scent that always felt older than time itself. I took a slow breath and began to walk across the shallow valley. Each step felt deliberate, gentle, as though the earth beneath me deserved a quiet respect. The depressions dotted the landscape in a loose pattern, and I paused at several of them, brushing the sand away just long enough to feel the firmness of stone beneath. The arrangement reminded me of foundations, perhaps the edges of houses or storage rooms or meeting spaces. It was impossible to be certain in the moonlight, but something in the layout felt right. It felt lived in once upon a time. Eventually, I reached a flatter area near the center of the valley. The sand here was smoother, undisturbed except for the faint marks left by the wind. I knelt down again and gently traced my hand across the surface. There, beneath a thin layer of sand, was a straight line, perfectly straight, too perfect to be natural. I brushed more sand aside, revealing a narrow gap between two carved stones, each one carefully fitted against the next. My breath caught slightly in my throat, though not from surprise, more from the quiet awe of touching something so old, so patient, so silently present. I sat back on my heels, resting my hands on my lap. Above me, the stars shimmered gently across the sky. The moon hung low, casting soft shadows across the uncovered stones. I whispered softly into the night, though there was no one to hear but the desert itself. I found it, not the whole city, not yet, but the beginning. The first quiet doorway into a world buried beneath centuries of drifting sand. I remained there for a long while, simply breathing, listening, allowing the desert night to fold gently around me. Tomorrow would bring the light, and with it, the next steps on my journey. When the first pale light of dawn touched the edge of the horizon, I opened my eyes slowly, awakening to the gentle stillness that blanketed the desert. I had slept lightly against the slope of the hill, wrapped in my scarf, listening through the night to the soft hush of shifting sand and the distant, rhythmic whisper of the wind. The air at dawn felt cool and crisp, brushing against my face with a gentle tenderness that eased me fully into wakefulness. I sat up slowly, letting my body adjust to the quiet morning light. The dunes around me glowed faintly beneath the rising sun, their smooth curves painted in soft shades of gold and muted pink. The sky above them was a wide canvas of pale lavender, deepening gradually toward a delicate blue. Everything felt calm, untouched, and beautifully still. I stretched my legs and arms gently, feeling the slight ache from yesterday's long walk. It wasn't uncomfortable, just a soft reminder of the distance I covered. I took a sip of cool water from my flask, savoring the refreshing taste as I watched the sun continue its slow ascent above the horizon. Today would be the day I began searching the area in earnest. I stood and brushed the grains of sand from my clothes. The valley below me remained quiet, its shallow depressions and faint stone outlines barely visible beneath thin layers of drifting sand. The moonlight had revealed them last night, but the early morning light revealed them differently, more softly, more subtly, like faint memories resurfacing slowly from the past. I walked down the slope with unhurried steps, feeling the sand shift gently beneath my boots. The breeze was cool and delicate, stirring loose grains around my feet as I approached the valley floor. The air carried a faint scent of stone warmed by sunlight, though the sun had barely risen. As I neared the first depression I had examined the night before, I knelt again, brushing away a thin layer of sand with slow, careful motions. My fingertips touched the same smooth stone edge I had found earlier, and I paused a moment, letting my hand rest on the ancient surface. It felt slightly warmer now, absorbing the new day's light. I smiled softly to myself. It was comforting to know that even after centuries buried beneath shifting sands, the stones still held warmth. Standing slowly, I surveyed the valley more thoroughly. The gentle sunlight revealed subtle differences in the color and texture of the ground. Darker lines where the sand was thinner, pale streaks where underlying stones pressed closer to the surface. These variations, though small, hinted at shapes and patterns that might once have formed streets, walls, or open spaces in the lost city. I began walking slowly, tracing a wide circle around the central area. I moved without hurry, taking steady breaths and letting the soft morning air guide my steps. Every now and then I crouched down to brush away more sand, uncovering the edge of stone or a small fragment that had once belonged to a structure now erased by time. As I moved, the sun climbed higher, warming the desert in a gentle, gradual embrace. The light shifted from soft gold to a brighter, more radiant hue, illuminating the shallow valley with newfound clarity. Shadows shortened and softened, revealing more detail in the landscape. I noticed something intriguing, a slight rise in the sand, forming a long, narrow ridge that extended almost perfectly straight across the valley. I approached it with careful steps, following its line with my eyes. It was too straight, too consistent to be natural. Kneeling beside the ridge, I brushed the sand aside, revealing a long stone slab beneath. Its surface was smoother than the others I had uncovered, and a faint groove ran along its length, as though something had once slid along it repeatedly. I traced the groove gently with my fingertips, imagining the movement that might have created it. Perhaps it had been a path, a place where carts rolled, or where water once flowed from some distant well. Or perhaps it had been part of a larger structure, its purpose lost to time. The possibility filled me with a quiet sense of wonder. As I followed the ridge further, I noticed more stones beneath the sand, arranged in a pattern that suggested the outline of a building. The stones were arranged in straight lines, forming corners that angled precisely toward the rising sun. I paused at one of these corners, brushing away the sand until I revealed the smooth edge of the foundation stone. It was larger than the others I had seen, broad, heavy, and still firmly set in place despite centuries of shifting earth. I placed my palms against it, feeling its solidness beneath my hands. For a moment, I closed my eyes and imagined walking through this place long ago when the city was alive. I imagined the warmth of the sun against the stone walls, the soft hum of voices, the quiet footsteps of people going about their daily routines. Everything felt peaceful in my mind, calm, rhythmic, gentle, just as the desert felt now. I continued tracing the foundation until I reached what seemed to be the remains of an entrance. Two large stones stood slightly taller than the rest, leaning toward one another in a way that suggested they had once framed a doorway. Sand had gathered between them, forming a small slope leading downward. I knelt and placed my hands on both sides of the entrance stones. They felt cool and smooth, and beneath my touch, I sensed a faint echo of the past, a whisper of something that once had purpose, once had form, once had meaning. I leaned back slightly and let my gaze drift across the quiet valley. The sun's rays warmed the stones, bringing a gentle glow to the ancient outlines that marked the land. Everything around me felt soft, peaceful, and deeply serene. The lost city beneath the sand was beginning to show itself little by little. I stood again, brushing the sand from my hands, and took a slow breath. As the sunlight spread across the valley, I felt as though I were slowly unveiling a long-forgotten story, one that had waited patiently for the right moment to resurface. With gentle steps, I began exploring the lines and patterns of the buried structures, tracing their shapes with my fingertips, following their curves and corners with quiet curiosity. Each discovery felt like a soft voice rising from the earth, offering a fragment of memory from a world that had fallen silent long ago. The desert wind drifted past, warm and steady, carrying with it a sense of timeless calm. And as I continued my slow, deliberate search, I felt myself sinking deeper into the soothing rhythm of this forgotten place, walking not just across sand and stone, but across the quiet remnants of a city that had waited centuries for someone to listen. I moved slowly across the valley floor, letting the morning light guide my steps. As the sun climbed a little higher, the colors of the desert shifted from cool gold to a warmer, softer amber. The sand shimmered gently as though waking from its own quiet slumber. I paused often, not because I was tired, but because everything around me invited a slower pace. Each detail, each shadow, each gentle curve of the earth seemed to whisper that there was no need to rush. Near the center of the valley, I noticed a cluster of stones arranged in a shape that was almost circular. At first glance, it looked like a natural formation, but as I approached, I saw smooth edges and deliberate placement. I knelt beside the nearest stone, brushing away the sand with long, careful strokes of my hand. The stone was tall, standing upright, its surface rounded as though shaped by both human hands and centuries of wind. It leaned slightly toward another stone just a few steps away. Together, they formed part of a larger pattern, one that had once been a complete circle, perhaps a gathering place or the foundation of a communal space. I walked slowly around the stones, letting my fingers drift across their surfaces. The touch felt strangely comforting, cool, smooth, steady. Each stone held its own quiet presence, a calmness that seemed to resonate with the gentle hush of the desert around me. I imagined people once standing here, speaking softly in the early morning, sharing water or stories, preparing for the day's tasks. Their voices were long gone, but the air still felt filled with the memory of gentle human rhythms. I continued circling the stone formation until I reached a smaller gap where the stones had collapsed inward. I knelt again, brushing more sand aside, revealing fragments of pottery, small pieces with faint, worn patterns etched into them. I held one carefully between my fingertips, feeling the delicate weight of history resting in that tiny shard. It was fragile yet enduring, a small fragment of a life that had once existed here. I placed the shard back where I found it and stood slowly, letting my eyes drift across the valley once more. The sun warmed my shoulders, and the breeze carried the soft scent of dust and stone. Everything felt calm and deeply grounded. Farther along the valley, I noticed another pattern in the sand, a long, gentle slope leading downward, almost like the start of a buried pathway. I walked toward it with measured steps, feeling the sand beneath me shift subtly in its familiar rhythm. As I reached the slope, I could see that parts of the sand had settled lower here, as though the ground below had hollow spaces. I tested the sand with the toe of my boot. It moved more easily than before, slipping downward in a slow cascade. Carefully, I knelt and dug my hands into the loose grains, letting them run through my fingers. The sand revealed more of the smooth stone beneath, another foundation broader than the others I had seen. I brushed the surface until I uncovered a long rectangular slab, carved with faint horizontal grooves. It might once have been part of a floor, or perhaps a walkway that guided people through the city. I ran my palm along its length, feeling the tiny imperfections worn by time. The stone still held its shape, its lines still straight beneath the sand. Despite everything, it remained quietly steadfast. As I continued clearing the sand around the slab, something else caught my attention. Subtle, shallow impressions on the stone surface, barely visible unless the light hit them at just the right angle. I leaned closer, adjusting my position until the sunlight revealed faint markings. They weren't symbols, not letters, not drawings, more like gentle indentations made by tools smoothing clay or soft stone. These were the traces of work, simple, practical, human work, left behind by people who had once built their lives here, shaping stones with intent and care. I felt a soft ache of curiosity and tenderness in my chest. It was comforting to think of them not as distant, unreachable figures from a forgotten age, but as hands that once shaped this place with purpose, the same way I now gently brushed the sand from their efforts. A gentle breeze passed through the valley, carrying with it a slightly warmer scent. The sun was now bright enough to illuminate the entire area, revealing more subtle rises and dips in the ground. The valley floor was not random. It held a pattern, soft and quiet though it was. I followed the slope upward, walking toward a gentle ridge that seemed to divide the valley into two uneven halves. As I climbed the ridge, the texture of the sand changed slightly. It felt firmer beneath my boots, mixed with more small stones, as though the surface here had once been paved or reinforced. When I reached the top, I paused, letting my breath steady as I looked down on the other side. There, spread out beneath me, lay an even larger expanse of shallow depressions and buried lines. The shapes were more numerous here, more complex, overlapping and stretching outward in ways that suggested an organized settlement. Some lines formed long rectangles, others curved into sweeping arcs. The city was larger than I had imagined. I walked down the slope slowly, feeling a deep sense of calm and reverence. The space ahead felt sacred, not in a religious sense, but in a quiet human way. It held the weight of countless days lived by people who had walked these very grounds, people who had built homes, shared meals, and watched their children grow. Their world was gone, yet its outlines still lingered beneath the sand. As I walked deeper into the larger section of the valley, I noticed that the sand was thinner in some areas, revealing more carved stones beneath. I knelt at one place where a small cluster of them rose just above the surface. They formed the outline of what might have been a large rectangular structure, perhaps a central building, a marketplace, or a meeting hall. I brushed the sand aside from the corner of one stone, revealing a faint indentation shaped like a handhold. It was simple but purposeful, as though designed to help someone grip the stone during construction. The detail felt deeply human, grounding me in a sense of connection with the people who had once shaped this place. I rested my hand in the indentation, letting it fit naturally into the space where another hand had rested centuries ago. The stone felt cool beneath my palm, steady and unchanged. The moment felt intimate, quiet, and unexpectedly emotional, as though time had briefly folded, allowing two distant moments to touch. As I stood again, my gaze drifted slowly across the expanse of the valley. The morning had grown warmer, and the desert shimmered softly with heat, though the sun's intensity remained gentle at this early hour. A bird passed overhead, its wings casting a fleeting shadow on the sand below. I took a deep breath, letting the warm air fill my lungs. The desert felt alive, not with noise or movement, but with presence, with memory, with the subtle pulse of time layered beneath my feet. I walked toward a narrow channel in the ground, a long trench running between two raised sections. As I knelt beside it, I brushed away sand until I felt smooth stone beneath, forming the bottom of a once functional canal or drainage path. I ran my fingertips along the stone's surface, feeling the slight concavity carved by water long ago. It wasn't hard to imagine the sound of water trickling through this channel, cooling the air of the city, bringing life to the stones and the people who walked beside it. Even in silence, I could almost hear it, a faint, soothing murmur echoing through the valley of memory. I sat back on my heels, letting my body relax. The soft wind brushed across my face again, warm and comforting. The stones beneath my touch felt ancient yet familiar, like quiet companions in a place made for reflection. The lost city beneath the sand was no longer simply a mark on an old map. It was here, present, patient, unfolding itself softly in the gentle light of morning. And as I stood up once more, breathing in the warmth of the rising sun, I felt a quiet sense of gratitude wash over me. I had found it, and now, slowly, it was allowing me to understand it. The morning continued to brighten slowly, though the light remained soft enough to feel gentle on my skin. As I walked deeper into the valley, the shapes beneath the sand grew more defined. The more I looked, the more I realized that the lost city was not confined to a single area. It sprawled outward in quiet complexity, its foundations stretching far beyond what I had imagined the night before. But still, there was something missing, something I felt more than understood. A sense that beneath this surface, beneath the stones I could see, there were deeper layers waiting to be uncovered. Not dramatic mysteries, not hidden treasures, but a quieter truth about how people had once lived here. A truth that still slept under the sand, untouched by the rising sun. As the heat of the morning grew just slightly warmer, I chose a direction almost instinctively toward a series of low ridges that curved gently across the landscape like the traces of an old, forgotten wall. I walked toward them with slow, even steps, letting the soft breeze guide my movements. The wind brushed lightly against my clothing, carrying with it the faint whisper of shifting grains. When I reached the ridges, I noticed that the sand piled up more heavily against one side, as though it had gathered over time where a higher structure once stood. I knelt down and pressed my hand against the slope. The sand was warm on top, but cool beneath the surface, insulating whatever lay hidden below. With calm, deliberate motions, I brushed the sand aside. Thin lines of stone appeared, forming a long curve that followed the exact shape of the ridge. I traced it gently, imagining how it once rose above the ground, perhaps serving as part of an outer boundary, something that defined the edge of life here. Standing slowly, I followed the curve, walking in the direction it led me. My steps were quiet, softened by the warm sand, and I found myself sinking into a peaceful rhythm. The desert wind hummed softly in my ears, blending with the subtle crunch of sand beneath my boots. As I walked, I began to notice a change in the landscape. The ground grew slightly firmer, and the pattern of buried stones became more consistent, almost as though I were walking along a street once shaped by purposeful hands. The thought warmed me in a gentle, comforting way. I imagined children running along this path centuries ago, elders sitting in shaded corners, the soft murmur of daily life echoing faintly in my mind. Then just ahead, the ground dipped gently downward. The slope was shallow, covered in even layers of smooth sand, and at the bottom lay a faint outline, barely visible, of a rounded shape half buried beneath the surface. Curious, I approached and knelt beside it. The sand here was finer, slipping through my fingers like warm silk. I brushed it away with slow, sweeping motions, revealing the outline of a circular stone platform. Its edges were smooth, more finely carved than the other stones I had uncovered so far. For a long moment, I simply rested my hand on its cool surface. It felt intentional, meaningful, a place where people once gathered, not for rituals or worship, but for simple, everyday life. Perhaps a quiet meeting place, a resting point, or the center of a small communal area. I closed my eyes and exhaled gently, letting the peacefulness of the thoughts settle into me. There was something soothing about discovering not grandeur, not monuments, but the quiet, human traces of daily existence. It made the lost city feel less like a forgotten relic and more like a place that had truly lived, breathed, and held warmth long before it slept beneath the sand. After a while, I stood again and walked around the circular stone, letting my footsteps form a soft ring around it. The morning sun warmed my back, and the air fluttered with a soft, comforting stillness. From this vantage point, I noticed something further to the east, a slight indentation in the sand, stretching in a long, narrow path. It was subtle, but it aligned perfectly with what could have been the main road into the city. I decided to follow it. The sand over this path was smoother, untouched except for faint ripples created by the wind. As I walked, my mind drifted gently, imagining the way this road might have looked long ago. Perhaps lined with small buildings, clay homes, or shaded stalls where people exchanged goods. Perhaps it had been a peaceful path where travelers rested, sharing stories under the soft glow of dawn. I continued walking until the faint path led me to another cluster of stones, this time forming what might have been the foundation of a larger structure. The stones were smooth and rectangular, arranged with clear intention, though time had shifted some of them inward or deeper beneath the sand. I knelt and brushed the sand aside from one of the foundation stones. Its surface held faint lines, not carved symbols, but gentle scraping marks made by tools smoothing the stone. The marks overlapped slightly, layered with the subtle imprints of effort and care. As I traced them with my fingers, I felt an unexpected wave of tenderness. These weren't the work of nameless, distant figures. They were the marks of people who lived, who built, who shaped their world with quiet diligence. Their hands had moved across this very surface, smoothing it with simple tools, perhaps humming softly as they worked, perhaps thinking about the day ahead. I leaned back slightly, letting my gaze soften as I looked across the gentle rise and fall of the sand around me. Everything felt warm and still. I felt a deep connection with this place, its calm, its quiet history, its subtle endurance. The wind stirred again, brushing a soft wave of air across my face. I softened my breath, matching the slow rhythm of the desert. Beyond the foundation, I saw a narrow gap between two stones, too narrow for a doorway, but wide enough to suggest the edge of an inner room or enclosed space. I approached it gently and lowered myself onto my knees. With slow, careful motions, I brushed aside the sand. The space beneath revealed the faint outline of a floor, smooth stone, slightly concave from centuries of settling. It was beautiful in its simplicity, a plain, empty surface that once held the footsteps of people moving quietly through their daily routines. I placed my palm flat on the stone floor. It felt cool, steady, patient, as though it had waited a long time for someone to touch it again. For a while, I stayed there, breathing slowly, letting my thoughts wander in soft, gentle circles. The desert breeze passed through the quiet valley, carrying the whisper of sand shifting along the ground. Above me, the sun rose higher, casting warm light across the buried city. Eventually, I stood once more, brushing sand from my hands. I looked across the subtle shapes and contours of the land, the faint ridges, the shallow dips, the half-revealed stones that hinted at the quiet life that had once existed here. There was still much to discover, much to understand, And as I walked deeper into the quiet expanse of the lost city, I felt a peaceful certainty settle within me. I was exactly where I needed to be, and the city, patient beneath the sand, was ready to reveal more of its gentle, quiet story. I walked further into the heart of the valley, letting the warm desert air settle gently around me as the sun climbed higher. Its light was still soft, golden, and calm, casting gentle shadows across the faint outlines of the city beneath my feet. The shapes became clearer with every step I took, as though the morning itself was helping reveal the long-buried story hidden in the sand. As I moved, I noticed the subtle rise of another structure. Unlike the rectangular foundations I'd already seen, this one had an elongated curve to it, almost like the remains of a long corridor or the outer wall of a building shaped with careful thought. I approached it slowly, letting my footsteps soften as I drew closer. When I knelt beside the curved formation, I pressed my hand into the sand. It felt warm on the surface, but cool a few inches below, as though the deeper layers still held the memory of the night. I brushed the grains aside with slow, patient motions, revealing the gentle arc of a smooth stone wall. Its angle was precise, purposeful, though softened by centuries of erosion. I traced the arc with my fingertips, following its line until the sand covered it once more. It was easy to imagine that this had once been part of a long walkway, perhaps a place where people passed each other in the early morning light, exchanging quiet greetings, carrying baskets or pottery jars. The calmness of that thought lingered with me, warming the center of my chest. I stood and stepped back slightly, surveying the structure from a small distance. The curve extended farther than I had expected, disappearing gradually beneath the sand. The way it arced suggested it might have once enclosed a courtyard or a sheltered room, a place where life unfolded in the shade during hot afternoons. With slow, measured steps, I walked along the curve, letting my hand rest lightly on the sand that blanketed the structure. There was something comforting about following the line of the wall, like tracing the edge of a memory made of stone. As I reached the end of the arc, I noticed a small rise, barely a mound, just a few paces away. The shape felt different from the natural dunes around it, so I approached with quiet curiosity. When I reached it, I knelt again and pushed aside a handful of sand. Beneath it, the edge of a small stone platform appeared. The stone was flatter and smoother than the others I had seen so far. I brushed away more sand, revealing a surface that sloped gently downward, as though leading into an entryway or step. But what caught my attention most was a faint indentation near the edge, oval in shape, just large enough for a hand to rest inside. I placed my palm over it gently. My hand fit almost perfectly into the soft hollow of the stone. Not a symbol, not a carving, just a touch worn into the surface by repeated use. I let my hand remain there for a long moment, breathing slowly, matching the soft rhythm of the desert breeze. The sensation was grounding, almost tender, an intimate reminder that the people who built this place had lived simple, ordinary lives filled with small, human gestures. A hand resting on stone, a pause, a breath. I stood again and continued downward along the gentle slope beside the platform. The sand grew thinner here, revealing faint patterns pressed into the ground, parallel grooves that stretched several meters before fading into the sand once more. I crouched beside them, brushing gently at the surface. The grooves were shallow but consistent, marking the path of something that had once moved across this space regularly. Perhaps wooden carts, or heavy containers dragged along the ground, or even narrow benches that lined the walkway. I leaned back and let the patterns settle into my thoughts. It was peaceful to imagine the daily motion of people here, the soft scrape of wood or pottery sliding across stone, the low murmur of voices carrying gently through the warm air. A small gust of wind swept across the valley, lifting a light cloud of sand that danced briefly in the sunlight before settling again over the buried stones. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the wind brush across my face. Its touch felt soothing, like a quiet reassurance from the land itself. When I opened my eyes again, the sunlight had shifted slightly, revealing something I hadn't noticed before, a faint horizontal line stretching across a broader flat surface nearby. I approached it slowly, brushing the sand away as I knelt again. Beneath the thin layer of sand lay a row of flat stones, aligned carefully side by side. Their surfaces were wider than those of the foundations I had seen earlier, forming what might once have been the floor of a larger communal space. Perhaps a gathering room or open hall where people met in the evenings to talk, share news, or simply rest together. I ran my fingertips across the stones, feeling the small variations in texture, the gentle dips where footsteps had once pressed. The thought made me smile softly. Even buried beneath centuries of sand, the subtle weight of those footsteps remained, almost like an echo preserved in stone. As I stood once more, I noticed that the stones formed a long rectangular shape. I walked around it slowly, letting my steps trace the edges of the room. The soft hiss of sand shifting under my boots blended with the quiet hum of the wind. The world felt peaceful, grounded, entirely present. On the far side of the rectangle, another faint line caught my eye, this one diagonal and less distinct. I brushed the sand away and uncovered a smaller, narrow stone, a threshold stone, perhaps, marking the entrance to this large room. The threshold felt smooth beneath my hand, worn in a way that suggested countless crossings. I placed both hands on it gently and closed my eyes, imagining the soft thud of footsteps passing through this space long ago. Not hurried footsteps, not rushed, but calm and steady, as though life here flowed at its own quiet pace. I opened my eyes again and breathed slowly, letting the calmness of the valley sink into me. The desert seemed to hold its silence with purpose, wrapping every stone, every buried line in a blanket of stillness. After some time, I stepped beyond the threshold and into the larger rectangular space. The air felt slightly cooler here, though nothing remained of the walls that once enclosed it. Still, the energy felt different, softer, more contained, as though the valley itself remembered this as a place of rest. I crossed to the far side of the room and paused when my boot pressed into something firmer beneath the sand. Kneeling down, I swept the sand aside until I uncovered a small stone block, square, smooth, and perfectly placed at the corner of structure. A seat, perhaps, or a pedestal, something simple, functional, and quietly important. I sat on it carefully, letting the cool stone support my weight. From this position, the entire valley lay open before me. The faint outlines of homes, paths, walls, and meeting spaces stretching out like a soft, forgotten map. I breathed in the warm morning air and let my shoulders relax. The valley was silent except for the gentle whisper of the wind and the soft shifting of sand beneath its breath. I closed my eyes and listened to the quiet, to the stillness, to the subtle hum of time layered beneath my feet. This place held no grandeur, No towering monuments, no dramatic secrets, only the soft, human traces of a gentle life once lived under the same sky I now gazed upon. And in that simplicity, I found a deep, calming beauty. The sun warmed my back, and the breeze brushed softly against my face. I remained there for a long while, breathing, listening, simply existing in the peaceful heart of the lost city beneath the sand. The warmth of the late morning sun rested softly on my shoulders as I stood from the small stone seat. The valley felt different now, not because the city had become clearer, but because I had begun to move in rhythm with it. Each step I took seemed to match the quiet heartbeat of the place, as though I were no longer simply exploring, but gently being guided. I brushed a thin layer of sand from my clothes and began walking toward a slightly raised area on the far side of the valley. The rise was subtle, gentle, just enough to stand out from the softer dunes. The wind had shaped it over centuries, smoothing its edges until it appeared almost like a natural wave of stone beneath the sand. As I approached it, I noticed small stones scattered across its slope, rounded, deliberate, arranged in a way that hinted at a pattern beneath the surface. I knelt beside the first one and pressed my palm against it. It felt warmer than the other stones I had touched earlier, a sign that it lay closer to the sunlit surface. With slow, calming movements, I brushed aside the sand surrounding it. The stone revealed a flattened top surface, smooth and slightly angled, as though it had once formed the corner of a higher structure. I followed the angle, uncovering a second stone just a short distance away, then a third. Each one seemed connected, like quiet footprints left by an ancient hand. Standing again, I took a few steps backward to observe the gentle rise as a whole. The stones formed a faint line, a foundation of something larger hidden beneath the sand. The shape curved slightly, soft and wide, almost like the outline of a building with multiple rooms or open spaces. I walked along its edge, letting my fingertips drift lightly over the sand that covered the hidden stones. The rhythm of my footsteps, steady, calm, unhurried, merged with the low hush of the desert wind. The sound felt soothing, like a quiet melody played gently beneath the morning sun. As I reached the highest part of the gentle rise, I paused and looked out across the valley. From this vantage point, the area felt more expansive. Shadows softened the shapes of the buried structures, and the delicate light made each outline look like a memory emerging slowly from sleep. The view calmed me deeply. A soft breath escaped my lips, long and easy. I felt my shoulders soften, my mind drift into a quiet stillness. Turning slightly, I noticed a narrow indentation cutting across the rise, barely visible unless I stood exactly where the sunlight fell just right. Intrigued, I knelt carefully beside it and brushed away the top layer of sand. Underneath lay a long, shallow groove, straight, smooth, intentional. I ran my hand along its length. It didn't seem like part of a foundation. It was more delicate, more precise. Perhaps it once guided something thin and lightweight. A sliding beam? A piece of wood? A narrow shutter for a window? Something meant not for strength, but for gentle movement. The thought was peaceful. I imagined the soft sound of something sliding softly along this track long ago, perhaps in the quiet of dawn or the gentle shade of evening. Standing again, I continued following the rise until the ground sloped gently downward toward another shallow valley. Here, the sand felt slightly firmer, as though packed by centuries of wind funneling between the surrounding ridges. As I stepped into this new space, The air felt different, cooler, almost sheltered. The valley was narrower, walled by two soft hills of sand that curved inward, creating a natural pocket of shade. The sun's warmth softened here, creating a gentle, muted glow that made the air feel still and tender. I moved deeper into the shaded pocket, breathing slowly, letting the calmness settle around me like a warm blanket. The sand beneath my feet was smoother, almost silky. As I walked, my footsteps created soft, delicate impressions that lingered longer before fading under the shifting breeze. Near the center of this quiet hollow, I noticed a faint depression, wider than the others, softer in shape. I knelt beside it, sweeping the sand away with unhurried motions. What emerged was different from what I had uncovered so far. A single, broad stone lay beneath the sand, flat, smooth, and placed horizontally, as though it had once been the floor of a small platform. Unlike the other stones, this one carried a faint sheen, as though polished long ago by countless footsteps or gentle hands. I touched its surface with the tips of my fingers. It felt cool, still, almost serene. As I brushed more sand aside, the stone revealed soft, curved edges, shaped not for function, but for comfort. I imagined someone sitting here in the shade, resting from the heat of the day, perhaps sharing a quiet moment with a companion, or simply watching the shadows change as the sun moved across the sky. I closed my eyes briefly, breathing in the coolness of the shaded air. The space felt deeply calm, almost like a sanctuary within the larger city, an oasis of silence meant for reflection, for gentle conversation, for peace. After a while, I stood and took a slow step back. As the sun shifted slightly, a new detail came into view, a thin, horizontal line beneath the sand near the edge of the stone platform. I crouched again and brushed away the sand, revealing a second stone placed just slightly lower than the first. A step, a small, quiet step leading downward, perhaps into a garden or a lower courtyard or a shaded area once lined with soft mats or woven fabrics. The idea made me smile. I could almost imagine someone descending these steps in soft sandals, carrying a clay bowl of water or fruit, ready to sit and rest in the cool shade. The thought was tender, comforting, warm. Standing once more, I followed the line of the steps downward, uncovering one, then another, each one placed with careful precision. The steps were shallow, meant not for hurried movement, but for slow, easy descent. The lowest step led to an open, flat area where the sand was finer than anywhere else I had been. It flowed between my fingers like warm powder, soft and delicate. I settled into a kneeling position and brushed the sand away from a broader stretch of the ground. Beneath the surface, faint patterns appeared, barely noticeable at first, but growing more visible as I cleared the area. Lines, soft, gentle lines, not symbols, not words, just delicate grooves shaped into the stone with no apparent purpose except perhaps decoration, or the simple expression of someone's quiet hand. The grooves curved and long, sweeping arcs that interlaced gently, forming a pattern that reminded me of ripples in water. I traced them with my fingertips, feeling the subtle dips and rises beneath my hand. For a long time, I stayed like that, kneeling in the shade, tracing the soft curves in the stone, letting their quiet rhythm soothe my thoughts. It felt like touching a quiet piece of someone's life, someone who knew the patterns of wind and sand, who perhaps drew shapes in moments of rest, leaving behind a gentle expression carved into the heart of the city. I lifted my hands slowly and breathed deeply. The valley felt even more peaceful now, more intimate, more alive with the soft echo of human presence, long faded, yet never entirely gone. I stood again, letting the warm breeze brush against my skin. The shadows around me softened as the sun continued its slow ascent. I gazed across the valley and felt a profound calm settle deep within me. This city, this quiet, buried place, it had not been lost to time out of tragedy or disaster. It had simply fallen asleep beneath the shifting sands, preserved in silence, waiting patiently for someone to walk gently through its memories. And I was here, walking softly, listening with care. There was still so much more to find, so much more to understand. And as I stepped away from the shaded hollow, I felt a quiet certainty in my chest. The city was ready to show me more, one slow breath at a time. I left the shaded hollow with slow, mindful steps, feeling its calm embrace linger even as I walked back toward the gentle light of late morning. The air had grown slightly warmer, but not harsh, just enough for the warmth to settle lightly across my arms and shoulders. The shift felt pleasant, a reminder that the day was unfolding softly around me. As I moved away from the small sanctuary of stone and sand, I found myself drawn toward another subtle feature in the landscape. Just beyond a low ridge, I noticed a faint depression, a long, narrow one that stretched diagonally across the ground. It was partially hidden by a thin layer of wind-blown sand, but the shape was too purposeful to ignore. I approached it with quiet curiosity, kneeling beside its edge. The sand here was smoother, almost polished by the wind. I brushed it aside gently, watching it spill over my hand like warm, golden powder. Beneath it lay a flat stretch of stone, wider than those I had uncovered earlier. I traced its surface with my fingertips. The stone felt cool, even under the sun. Its edges were smoother, its surface more deliberate, like a walkway or platform that people once crossed often, wearing down its texture with countless gentle steps. As I uncovered more of the stone, the shape revealed itself slowly. It formed a long, slightly curved path, connecting two sections of the buried city. The curve was subtle, almost graceful, as though the stone had been laid with care not only for function, but for the natural flow of movement. I stood and followed the curve, walking slowly, letting my feet align with the faint rhythm of the path. The soft crunch of my footsteps blended with the quiet hum of the wind, creating a soothing harmony that echoed gently across the valley. The path led me toward another rise, a gentle slope that caught the light in a way that made the sand shimmer. As I climbed the slope, the air seemed to shift again, cooler and quieter, as though this higher place held a different energy. When I reached the top, I paused and looked out across the valley. From this vantage point, I could see the subtle outlines of the city far more clearly. The faint rectangles, circles, curves, and straight lines spread across the sand like the soft impressions of forgotten memories. The sight filled me with a deep sense of wonder. I took a slow breath, letting the stillness settle into me. The desert felt vast, yet intimate, silent yet full of gentle echoes. Turning slightly, I noticed a shallow indentation near the edge of the slope. It was small, almost hidden, but the sand around it seemed slightly darker, as though the wind had not been able to completely cover what lay beneath. I knelt again and brushed the sand aside with careful, steady movements. Beneath it, I uncovered another stone platform, smaller than the one in the shaded hollow, but smoother, more refined, with a soft curve along its outer edge. As I revealed more of it, I noticed a faint channel carve along one side, a narrow groove guiding water or air, or perhaps just creating a subtle aesthetic line. The groove was shallow, but its presence felt intentional. I let my fingertips trace it slowly, following its gentle arc. For a long moment, I knelt there in silence, feeling the coolness of the stone against my hand. The world around me seemed to pause. Even the breeze softened, brushing past like a quiet sigh. When I stood again, I moved toward the slope that descended on the opposite side of the rise. As I walked down, I noticed that the sand grew firmer and slightly darker. The texture beneath my boots changed, as though the surface concealed larger stones deeper below. At the bottom of the slope lay another faint outline, one I hadn't seen from above. It looked like the remains of a long, rectangular structure. Its edges were subtle, but as I approached, I could see that the sand was thinner here, hinting at the straight lines beneath. I knelt at the nearest corner and brushed the sand away. Beneath it lay a large foundation stone, wide, smooth, and slightly sunken. Its edges created a perfect right angle, marking the corner of what might once have been a significant building. I moved along the outline, brushing the sand away piece by piece. More stones emerged, each one placed with precision, forming a shape that felt more complete than any structure I had found so far. Perhaps a hall, or a central meeting place, some space that once held the quiet pulse of daily life. The more I uncovered, the more the building revealed itself. The floor beneath the sand was smoother, flatter, almost polished. I sat on the edge of a half-buried step and placed my hand on the stone. It felt steady, patient, like it had waited a long time for someone to sit here again. I closed my eyes and inhaled slowly. The desert air tasted warm, almost sweet. I could almost imagine the soft murmur of voices that once filled this space, the gentle rustle of fabric, the quiet footsteps of people moving calmly through the day. I allowed myself to sit there for a while, breathing, listening, simply existing in the tranquil heart of the forgotten room. When I opened my eyes, the sunlight had shifted again, casting softer shadows across the stones. I stood and walked to the far end of the structure, where the sand gathered more deeply. I crouched and brushed it aside, revealing the top of a long, narrow stone that lay beneath. This one was different, thicker, heavier, placed carefully to span the width of the structure like a threshold. I pressed my palm against it. The stone felt cool and reassuring beneath my hand. I leaned closer, brushing more sand aside until I uncovered the faintest groove along its edge. Not carved, not decorative, just a natural where formed by centuries of footsteps passing softly across this last threshold. The idea of so many gentle steps left a warm ache in my chest. These were not dramatic remains, not ruins of grandeur. They were the quiet traces of simple lives, lives shaped by warmth, routine, companionship, stillness, lives that felt intimately close to my own heartbeat. As I stood again, I looked across the valley one more time. The sunlight washed over the hidden walls and foundations, softening them into shapes barely distinguishable from the sand itself. The city was still mostly buried, still mostly asleep, but piece by piece, it was awakening beneath my hands. And I felt deeply honored to witness it. The breeze drifted through the valley once more, carrying a soft hush that felt almost like gratitude. I breathed deeply, letting the calmness settle into my body, feeling my heartbeat slow and soften. There was still more to discover, much more, and I sensed that the city was inviting me deeper, toward its quiet core, its softest memories, its most peaceful spaces. With slow, steady steps, I followed the curve of the buried walls, moving quietly, gently, into the next chapter of its long, sleeping story. The afternoon light settled slowly across the valley, softening every shape and warming the air with a gentle radiance. The shadows stretched long and delicate, tracing the faint outlines of buried walls and forgotten rooms like the quiet strokes of an ancient brush. I walked with unhurried steps, feeling the warmth beneath my boots, the fine sand shifting softly as if greeting each footfall with a whisper. There was something almost dreamlike about the way the city revealed itself. Never abruptly, never with certainty, but always with a slow, patient grace. Every uncovered stone felt like a gentle breath from the past, a soft reminder that time, though long and steady, never fully erases the lives once lived beneath its weight. I moved toward a cluster of shallow rises at the far edge of the valley. They were subtle, their shapes softened by centuries of wind. Yet something about their arrangement drew me in, a quiet invitation, a gentle promise that another part of the city lay just beneath the surface. As I approached the first rise, I noticed that the sand here was slightly different in color, just a shade darker, as if holding more moisture or pressed deeper by the structures beneath. I knelt down and rested my hand on the warm surface. It felt soft, almost velvety, as though the wind had smoothed it more carefully here. With slow, measured movements, I brushed the sand aside. The grain slid gracefully beneath my fingers, forming a small hollow. Beneath them, a stone appeared, rounded at the edges, smoother than most I had touched so far. I brushed more sand away until a larger surface emerged, forming the corner of what looked like a low platform. I traced its outline with my fingertips. The stone was cool beneath the thin layer of heat that the sun had left behind. Its edges curved gently, suggesting a place where people once sat or rested, perhaps a communal resting point, shaded by fabric or wooden beams now long gone. I let my hand linger on the surface. It felt peaceful, steady, comforting. After a long moment, I stood and circled around the rise, noticing how the stones beneath the sand formed a soft, rounded shape, almost like the foundation of a room built with comfort in mind, perhaps a small gathering space or a resting corner for quiet conversations. As I walked, my footsteps created soft impressions in the sand. The wind brushed against my clothing, warm and slow, carrying with it a faint scent of dry earth and sunlit stone. Everything felt calm, entirely without urgency. A few steps away, another shape rose slightly from the ground, wider this time, with a more pronounced slope. I approached and knelt beside it, brushing away the sand with wide, gentle strokes. The stone beneath was larger, flatter, and more angular. A table, perhaps, a work surface, a place where hand-shaped pottery or smoothed wooden beams or sorted woven fabrics. I pressed my palm against it. A faint warmth radiated from the stone, lingering from the sunlight. I closed my eyes briefly, imagining the quiet hum of daily life that once filled this place, the soft sounds of tools tapping gently, the murmur of voices, the rhythmic motions of hands working with patient skill. When I opened my eyes, I noticed something else, small fragments of pottery scattered near the base of the stone. They were tiny, worn to soft edges, but their shapes still hinted at careful craftsmanship. I picked one up delicately, holding it between my fingers. It was smooth, curved, and faintly colored with a warm, earthy tint. I rubbed my thumb across its surface, feeling the fine grain of clay shaped by long-gone hands. For a moment, I imagined those hands, moving slowly, shaping the material with calm, deliberate motions under the warm desert sun. I placed the fragment back where I found it, letting it settle gently into the sand. The desert breeze moved through the valley again, carrying a soft sighing sound that felt almost like a whisper. I stood and walked toward another subtle rise not far away. This one was longer, stretching nearly 10 paces from end to end. As I brushed the sand, the stones beneath revealed a narrow, elongated space, perhaps a hallway or a passage that once connected different areas of the settlement. I walked along the length of the buried passage, letting my fingertips drift lightly across the sand-covered stones that lined its edge. Each touch felt like a soft pulse from the past, a quiet echo of footsteps that had once traveled this path as part of ordinary life. At the far end of the passage, I noticed something unusual, a gentle dip in the sand, almost circular in shape. I knelt and swept the sand away from its center. Beneath it lay a shallow bowl carved into the stone itself. It was simple, unadorned, but beautifully smooth. I traced the curve of the bowl with slow movements. It felt like a resting place for water or grain or small objects used in daily tasks. Not a ceremonial artifact, not a symbol, just a quiet part of life, useful, simple, human. The smoothness of the carved bowl made me imagine the soft echoes of ancient hands scooping water from it, rinsing small tools, or preparing simple meals. The thought filled me with a warm sense of tranquility. As I stood again, I let my eyes wander across the valley. The sunlight was shifting toward late afternoon now, casting longer, softer shadows across the quiet rise and fall of the land. The shadows stretched into gentle lines that highlighted the shapes beneath the surface. The foundations, the pathways, the subtle corners of rooms where people once lived peacefully. I walked slowly toward the center of the valley once more. The air felt warm but soothing, a comfortable balance of sunlight and breeze. The sand beneath my feet gave slightly with each step, its texture delicate and familiar. When I reached the broad rectangular structure I had uncovered earlier, I sat again on the small cornerstone, letting its cool surface support me. The stone felt reassuringly steady beneath me, grounding me in the present even as my mind drifted softly through the past. The valley around me seemed to hum with quiet life. The soft wind brushed lightly across my shoulders. The sunlight warmed my hands. The silence felt deep, not empty, but full of gentle presence. I closed my eyes and inhaled slowly. The desert smelled faintly of warmth and dust and old stone. The air tasted dry, but comforting. I tilted my head back slightly, feeling the sun on my face. The warmth settled into me like a soft embrace. As I sat there, breathing quietly, an image formed in my mind, not vivid or detailed, but soft, like the memory of a dream. I imagined families gathered here in the shade, sharing food and stories as the afternoon light faded. I imagined children resting near the cool stones while their parents worked, shaping tools or weaving cloth. I imagined laughter carried lightly on the breeze, mixing with the soft hum of daily life. It was a quiet life, a gentle life, a life that left no grandeur behind, only the soft trace of human presence, preserved with tenderness beneath the sand. I breathed deeply again, letting the imagined warmth settle into my thoughts. The valley felt calm. The stones felt steady. The wind felt soft. And somewhere beneath the layers of sand, the city continued to share its quiet, patient story. I opened my eyes slowly, letting the light settle into them. The world around me looked softened, golden, peaceful. There was still more to explore, still more to understand, and I knew I would find it, gently, step by step, breath by breath, as the desert guided me deeper into its soft, sleeping heart. The light of the afternoon shifted steadily toward evening, softening into a warm amber glow that touched the valley with a gentle, almost tender warmth. The shadows lengthened across the quiet landscape, stretching delicately along the faint outlines of the buried city. Every shape, every stone, every subtle curve seemed to deepen in meaning under the changing light, as if the city chose this time of day to reveal its most peaceful memories. I rose slowly from the stone seat where I had rested, brushing a few grains of sand from my palms. The air felt warmer now, but still calm, like the gentle warmth of a blanket laid across the earth. I let myself breathe it in, long and slow, feeling it settle gently within me. As I walked away from the larger structure, I followed a faint path through the valley, one I hadn't noticed earlier. It curved softly between two low ridges, its shape suggested only by the way the sand dipped subtly beneath my feet. The sand here felt different, slightly firmer, as though supported by hidden stones below. Curious, I slowed my steps and knelt, brushing the surface with both hands. Beneath the thin layer of sand, a long stone slab revealed itself, smooth, pale, and worn with the soft erosion of time. I touched it lightly with my fingertips, feeling the faint grooves left by countless footsteps long ago. The slab extended further than I expected. I brushed away more sand, uncovering another piece, then another, forming a clear pathway. The stones were set carefully side by side, in a way that felt intentional and steady. Perhaps this had once been a main walkway, a central path where people moved between different parts of the settlement. I stood and followed its length, walking slowly and softly. The wind brushed gently against my legs, carrying with it the faint scent of warm earth. The valley around me was enveloped in a deepening calm, the stillness growing richer as the sunlight softened. The path led me toward a broader depression, a gentle, rounded hollow that seemed deeper than others I'd seen. I stepped into it carefully, feeling the slight shift in elevation beneath my feet. The hollow formed a soft, curved bowl in the land, its contours shaped delicately by time and wind. At its center, I noticed a cluster of stones arranged in a circular pattern, barely visible beneath the sand. I knelt and brushed them gently. The stones revealed themselves slowly, rounded, smooth, carefully placed in a near-perfect ring. A gathering space, perhaps. A quiet, communal area. A place for conversation or rest. I sat near the edge of the circle, letting the coolness of the evening breeze settle across my skin. The stones felt peaceful under my fingertips. The hollow created a soft acoustics. Every sound felt muted, gentle, contained. The breeze whispered quietly. The shifting sand made a faint, comforting rustle. Closing my eyes for a moment, I imagined people sitting in this circle centuries ago, speaking softly in the dimming light, sharing the calm end of the day. Perhaps they watched the same sunset I would soon see. Perhaps they laughed quietly or rested in silence, or simply listened to the wind in the same way I did now. I opened my eyes again and stood slowly. The hollow felt soothing, like a soft breath of the city's past brushing gently against the present. As I left the circle, I noticed another subtle detail nearby, a thin, shallow trench that cut across the ground in a graceful curve. I followed it with my fingertips, brushing away the sand. Beneath it lay a narrow channel carved into the stone. Not for water, too shallow for that. Not decorative, too plain, too simple. Just a soft groove, perhaps guiding something small or marking the edge of a living space. I followed the channel as it curved gently toward the western ridge. The sand grew warmer under my hand as the sunlight touched it. The groove ended at a smooth stone platform, barely raised above the surrounding ground. I knelt beside it and brushed away the sand. Beneath it lay a single flat stone, wide and polished, with slightly rounded corners. It felt familiar somehow, like a place meant for sitting or resting. I sat on the edge of it, folding my legs gently beneath me. From this vantage point, the valley opened before me like a soft, golden canvas. The light of late afternoon washed across the city's faint outlines, creating long, peaceful shadows that stretched toward the horizon. I let my hands rest on my lap and breathe deeply, slow, steady breaths that matched the gentle rhythm of the desert breeze. As I sat quietly, the world around me seemed to settle into an even deeper stillness. The sand shimmered softly. The wind sighed in quiet intervals. The faint shapes of the buried city felt more present than ever, as though the light itself were outlining its hidden memories. I closed my eyes, listening to the wind, to the sand, to the calm pulse of the earth beneath me. It was peaceful, deeply peaceful, a quiet that soothed everything within me. When I opened my eyes again, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the far side of the valley, the shadows gathered differently. A long, narrow line of darker sand stretched across the landscape, indicating the presence of something large beneath the surface. I walked toward it slowly, taking care not to disturb the softer areas of sand. When I reached the darker line, I knelt beside it and brushed the surface gently. A massive stone appeared beneath the sand, thicker than any I had uncovered so far. Its edge was straight, sharp, deliberate. I brushed more sand. Another stone beside it, then another. A long wall, still intact beneath the thin barrier of sand. But there was something else, something even more intriguing. As I followed the line of the wall, brushing as I went, the stones rose slightly higher, forming what might once have been the base of a larger building. At one point, the wall curved outward, creating a semicircular shape. I knelt there, brushing gently. The curve was flawless, smoothed by careful hands, shaped with intention. A central space, perhaps, a meeting hall, a quiet, indoor area where people gathered at the end of the day. In the softening light, it felt almost sacred, not in a religious sense, but in a human one. A place that once held togetherness, warmth, connection. I sat at the base of the curved wall, letting my back rest against the smooth stone. It felt cool against my skin, a soothing contrast to the warmth of the air. The desert around me softened further as evening approached. Shadows deepened. The sky's color shifted toward amber, then rose gold, then a delicate, fading pink. I let my eyes half close, breathing slowly. Every sound grew gentle. Every movement felt light. Every stone seemed to whisper with the soft hum of long-forgotten days. I remained there for a long time, listening to the quiet, listening to the calm heartbeat of the lost city beneath the sand. And in that stillness, I felt completely at peace. The last light of afternoon faded gently into the cool embrace of early evening. The sky above the valley softened into delicate hues of lavender and pale gold, as though the day were exhaling slowly, preparing itself for night. A calm stillness settled across the buried city, deep and serene, wrapping every stone and every quiet shadow in a peaceful glow. I rose from the curved wall where I had rested, brushing a few grains of sand from my hands. The warmth of the day lingered faintly on my skin, but the air around me had grown cooler, carrying the first hints of nightfall. The breeze was soft now, softer than it had been all day, moving across the valley like a gentle whisper. I walked slowly, my pace unhurried, my footsteps sinking lightly into the soft sand. Evening in the desert had a rhythm unlike any other, calm, patient, almost sleepy. The harshness of the sun melted away, leaving behind only the tender quiet of a world preparing to rest. I moved toward another part of the valley I had not yet explored. The light angled across this area in long, graceful lines, revealing faint ridges beneath the sand, shapes that hinted at structures still hidden. I walked toward them, letting the breeze brush gently against my face. As I reached the first ridge, I knelt and rested my hand on the surface. The sand here was cooler, its grains finer, as though the wind had shaped them with extra care. I brushed them aside slowly, uncovering a long, smooth stone, pale, wide, and worn down by centuries of stillness. It was different from the other stones I had found. Broader, heavier, its surface untouched by any grooves or marks. It felt like a foundation stone of something larger, something built with quiet purpose. I traced the edge with my fingertips. The texture was almost silky beneath the thin chill of evening. I followed the length of the stone, brushing away the sand until the outline of another stone appeared beside it. Then another and another. A large platform, perhaps the floor of a building that once stood proudly in the heart of the city. I sat back on my heels, breathing slowly. The cool breeze brushed across my shoulders, carrying the faint scent of distant dunes. I closed my eyes for a moment and imagined the structure as it once might have been, wide, open, peaceful. Maybe a place where people gathered in the evening, sharing soft conversations as the sun set. When I opened my eyes again, the sky had grown darker. Stars began to appear. First one, then a few more, then countless tiny points of light scattered across the deepening blue. The first breath of night washed across the valley, cool and gentle. I stood and walked along the edge of the wide platform, letting the soft shadows guide my steps. The ground dipped slightly as I moved, and the sand changed texture beneath my boots, thinner here, revealing the tops of buried stones more quickly. I knelt again at the base of a shallow slope and brushed the sand away. Beneath the surface lay another stone, a narrow one this time, set parallel to the platform. It felt like the edge of a walkway, a small step marking the boundary of an open area. As I cleared more sand, I noticed that the walkway curved gently outward, forming a graceful arc. The arc led toward a smaller depression nearby, almost like the entrance to a quiet courtyard. Curious, I walked toward it slowly. When I reached the edge of the depression, I knelt again. The sand here was very fine, almost powder-like. I brushed it aside delicately, uncovering a small, round stone, smooth, polished by time. I uncovered another beside it, then another, forming a ring of small stones arranged in a perfect circle. It felt intimate, soft, simple, human. A place where people once sat together under the evening sky. A place for quiet talk, gentle rest, or peaceful watching of the stars. I sat near the ring, feeling the coolness of the stones beneath my fingertips. The sky above me darkened further, forming a soft canopy of twilight. The first stars twinkled with delicate brightness, their faint light reflecting off the sand in tiny glimmers. I leaned back slightly, allowing the evening air to settle into my lungs. The sounds of the desert grew softer, calmer. The wind slowed, brushing my skin with the gentlest touch. The shifting sand made only the faintest sigh. Everything around me felt peaceful, deeply, soothingly peaceful. After a while, I stood again, letting my gaze drift along the narrow walkway leading away from the circular stones. The path curved gently toward the foot of a larger ridge. I walked toward it slowly, my steps soft and deliberate. The ridge rose higher than the others I had explored today. Its shape was subtle, rounded by time and wind, but something about it felt significant, almost like a protective shoulder of land, sheltering the valley below. As I climbed the gentle slope, the sand loosened beneath my boots, flowing softly as though welcoming my steps. When I reached the crest, I paused and looked out across the valley. The buried city lay beneath me in soft twilight, its outlines barely visible, its stones glimmering faintly under the first trace of moonlight. The sky stretched overhead in endless, deepening blue, decorated with the early shimmer of stars. I felt a wave of calm wash through me, soft, warm, steady. From this vantage point, the entire city felt like a sleeping memory, quiet, peaceful, untouched. The wind brushed past me, cool and gentle, wrapping around me like a soft embrace. As I stood there, breathing slowly, something caught my eye. At the base of the ridge, just a few paces down the slope, the sand formed a deeper indentation, one larger and more distinct than the others I'd seen today. Its shape was a gentle oval, its edges more defined. I walked down carefully, kneeling beside the center of the hollow. The sand felt colder here, as if it lay closer to the stone beneath. Slowly, I brushed it away. A flat, broad stone appeared, different from the others. It was smoother, wider, and curved more delicately. As I brushed away more sand, the shape became clear. A large floor stone, polished, gently concave, a place meant for sitting or resting. I sat on its edge, feeling the cold stone beneath my fingers. The breeze drifted softly around me, carrying the quiet hum of night. Above me, the sky darkened further. The stars grew brighter, shimmering like quiet embers in the deepening blue. A soft hush filled the valley, a silence so complete it felt like a gentle, calming blanket. I leaned back on my hands, letting the cool stone support me. My breathing slowed. My thoughts softened. Everything in the desert seemed to quiet itself for the night. As the first thin sliver of moon appeared above the horizon, casting a pale glow across the sand, I closed my eyes and let the calm settle deeply into my chest. The lost city beneath the sand felt alive, not with movement, but with presence, with warmth, with quiet memory. And sitting there under the rising moon, I felt completely at peace. The moon rose slowly above the horizon, its pale light spreading across the valley in a soft, silvery glow. The sand around me shimmered gently, reflecting the faint illumination like a quiet sea beneath the night sky. The air grew cooler with every passing moment, wrapping the buried city in a calm, soothing stillness. I remained seated on the wide, concave stone for a little while longer, letting the moonlight settle onto my skin. The stone beneath me felt cool and grounding, a steady presence in the deepening dusk. My breaths came slowly and evenly, matching the soft rhythm of the breeze. Eventually, I stood and walked slowly across the hollow, my steps quiet and soft against the sand. The valley had changed completely with the arrival of night. Shadows stretched long and gentle across the ground, and the outlines of the buried city were now illuminated by the moon rather than the sun. The transformation felt peaceful, like the city had slipped into its own quiet dream. I followed the faint curve of the walkway I had discovered earlier, tracing it with my fingertips as I moved deeper into the valley. The stones beneath the sand felt slightly cooler now, smooth beneath the thin layer of grains that covered them. My footsteps merged with the soft whisper of the wind, creating a delicate harmony that seemed to echo quietly through the night. Ahead of me, I noticed a subtle dip in the landscape, a shallow channel that stretched like a soft line through the sand. I knelt beside it and brushed aside the surface layer. Beneath it lay a narrow, carved trough, beautiful in its simplicity, worn smooth by time. It reminded me of a small irrigation channel, perhaps once guiding water through the heart of the city. The thought of water flowing gently through this valley long ago brought an unexpected comfort. The desert felt so quiet now, so still, yet I could imagine the soft murmur of water that once moved here, cooling the air and filling the settlement with life. I traced the length of the channel with slow fingertips. The stone felt cool under the moonlight. I followed the trough as it curved gently around a low mound of sand and disappeared beneath a cluster of buried stones. As I continued exploring, I noticed a gentle rise to my right, just enough to catch the moonlight in a way that made the sand shimmer. I walked toward it, drawn by its soft glow. At the top of the rise, I knelt and brushed away a light layer of sand. Beneath it, a large flat stone appeared, smooth, wide, and angled slightly toward the sky. It reminded me of a viewing platform, a place where someone might have sat on warm evenings to watch the stars. I settled onto the stone, folding my legs gently beneath me. The coolness of the surface seeped into my skin, calming me further. The night sky stretched above in a deep, velvety blue, dotted with countless stars that twinkled like tiny silver sparks. I let my head tilt back slightly, breathing deeply as I gazed upward. The constellations felt familiar, yet somehow more vivid here. Without artificial light, the stars shone softly but clearly, forming intricate patterns across the sky. I let my mind drift peacefully, imagining the ancient inhabitants of this city looking up at the same stars, perhaps finding comfort in their steady glow. The breeze brushed gently across my arms, cool and soothing. The desert had grown quiet, so quiet that I could almost hear the faint settling of sand beneath the slow breath of the night. The world felt hushed, wrapped in a blanket of calm that stretched across every grain beneath my feet. After a long, peaceful moment, I rose and descended the slope, moving toward another faint outline in the distance. As I walked, the sand glowed softly under the moonlight, shifting gently with my steps. Each movement felt weightless, as though the night had softened the pull of the earth. Near the far edge of the valley, I noticed a cluster of shallow depressions, too evenly spaced to be natural. I knelt beside the nearest one and brushed the sand away, revealing a small, flat stone embedded in the ground. I uncovered another beside it, then another. They formed a pattern, 3 stones in a row, each one perfectly aligned. Perhaps a pathway, perhaps the remains of a simple seating area, or perhaps a row of low supports that once held something light, like a canopy or structure that shaded this part of the settlement. I pressed my palm against one of the stones. The surface was cool and smooth, comforting beneath my touch. I stood and moved slowly along the line of stones, following their quiet rhythm. After a short distance, the line curved slightly, forming a small arc. I knelt again, uncovering more stones. A semicircle, a small, intimate space. A place where people might once have gathered close together, sharing a quiet meal, or resting after a long day, or simply watching the sky change as evening settled in. The thought warmed me, filling me with a gentle sense of connection to the past. These people had lived simple, peaceful lives beneath this same sky, walked across these same stones, breathed the same quiet desert air. I brushed away the sand from the center of the semicircle, uncovering a shallow indentation carved into the stone. It was smooth, rounded, barely noticeable, yet filled with meaning. Perhaps it held a simple vessel once. Perhaps it carried a little water or small objects used in daily life. The softness of the thought made me smile. Life here had not been grand. It had been gentle, ordinary, human. I sat at the edge of the semicircle and let the moonlight wash over me. The breeze brushed softly across my face, carrying with it the faint scent of cool stone and distant sand. The stars overhead shimmered with increasing clarity as the sky deepened. The moonlight cast long, delicate shadows across the valley, accentuating the quiet lines of the buried city. The world felt still, so still that even my own breathing seemed to blend into the silence. After some time, I stood once more and walked toward the final rise at the valley's edge. The slope was gentle, the sand cool beneath my feet. At the top, I paused and looked back at the city stretched beneath me. Under the moonlight, the valley appeared almost like a dream, soft, glowing, peaceful. The stones beneath the sand seemed to pulse faintly with memory, as though the city itself were breathing quietly in its sleep. I closed my eyes and inhaled slowly. The air was cool and comforting, the silence deep, the peace profound. I opened my eyes again and let the moonlight settle into them. I felt a sense of completion, a quiet fullness. The lost city beneath the sand had shared its most intimate spaces with me, its gentle corners, its quiet rooms, its soft memories. And now, as night settled fully across the valley, I felt a deep sense of belonging, as though the desert itself had wrapped me in its calm embrace. There was still more to discover, more to understand, but for now, surrounded by moonlight and silence, I stood quietly and breathed in the stillness. The city slept, and I, standing above it, felt utterly at peace. The moon had risen higher now, casting a soft silver glow across the valley. Every line of the buried city shimmered gently beneath its light, turning the sand into a calm, glowing sea. The air was cool and steady, carrying the quiet hush of night across the land. As I stood at the top of the ridge, looking down at the soft shapes beneath me, I felt a calmness so deep it seemed to settle into my bones. I took a slow breath and began walking down the slope, letting my steps remain soft and deliberate. The sand shifted quietly beneath my boots, creating barely a whisper of sound as I moved. The valley welcomed me gently, its silence warm and inviting. I walked toward a part of the city I had not yet explored, a broad stretch of sand that lay near the far end of the settlement. By day, it had looked flat and unremarkable, but under the moonlight, faint shadows formed delicate curves across its surface. Something lay beneath, something waiting quietly for discovery. As I reached the broad expanse, I knelt and placed both palms on the sand. The grains were cool, slipping softly through my fingers as I brushed them aside. Beneath the surface, I felt the unmistakable firmness of stone. I brushed more sand away, revealing a smooth, gently curved edge. I followed the curve with my fingertips. It extended farther than I expected. I brushed more sand, uncovering another curved stone beside the first. Together, they formed the beginning of a large, rounded shape, too smooth and too symmetrical to be natural. A large courtyard, perhaps, or a central gathering place, a heart of the city. I traced the curve slowly, moving around the buried shape. Every few steps, I uncovered another piece of stone, each one fitting together like the soft, ancient outline of a long-forgotten circle. The stones were larger than most I had uncovered, broader, thicker, set firmly into the earth. The more I revealed, the more I felt the significance of this place. It felt central, important in the quiet, human way that places become important when people gather there often, when life unfolds around them gently and repeatedly. I stood and moved to the center of the circle, letting the moonlight illuminate the space. The sand here was softer, finer, as though it had been protected somehow. It yielded easily under my hands as I brushed it away, revealing a large, flat stone lying perfectly in the center. I sat beside it and let my fingertips drift across its surface. Cool, smooth, steady. The stone felt like a resting place, a place where people once sat together at day's end, sharing quiet conversation beneath the same moonlit sky. The thought warmed me gently. I closed my eyes and inhaled slowly, imagining soft voices echoing through this space long ago. Gentle laughter, the rustle of fabric, quiet footsteps carried on the cool evening air. When I opened my eyes again, the night had deepened. The stars shimmered even more brightly, scattered across the sky in delicate clusters. The silence of the valley grew richer, wrapping around me in a tender, peaceful stillness. I stood and walked slowly across the circular space, brushing away small drifts of sand as I went. Near the far edge, I uncovered a narrow groove carved into the stone, thin, graceful, almost decorative. I traced its length with my fingertips. It curved gently around the circle, forming a soft boundary that seemed to guide the flow of movement. It felt thoughtful, crafted with care, a quiet beauty shaped not for display, but for the simple rhythm of daily life. I moved beyond the circle and walked toward a low, gentle mound a few steps away. The sand here was piled higher, blown in soft waves by centuries of wind. I knelt and pressed my hand into the slope. The sand gave way easily. As I brushed it aside, more stone revealed itself, this time forming a small staircase, its steps shallow and wide. I uncovered one, then a second, then a third. The staircase descended into a lower area, now filled with sand. I stood and moved down the steps carefully, feeling the cool stone beneath my boots. At the bottom, The ground leveled into a broad, sunken space. The moonlight illuminated the area softly, revealing faint, square outlines beneath the sand. I knelt again and brushed away the surface. A shallow basin emerged, a simple, rectangular depression carved into the stone. Perhaps it once held water, or cloth soaking in cool liquid, or small objects washed at the end of the day. I brushed more sand away. The basin extended farther than I expected. It was larger, deeper, carved with quiet precision. I placed my hands on its smooth edges and leaned forward slightly, letting the coolness settle into my palms. The idea of water moving gently through this space felt soothing. Soft ripples, quiet reflections of evening light, the faint scent of moisture cooling the warm desert air. I imagined people gathering here, rinsing their hands, washing small tools, preparing for the calm end of the day. I lifted my hands and stood slowly. The breeze brushed softly across my face, carrying with it the hint of distant dunes. The night felt deeper now, filled with the gentle hum of silence. I moved toward a narrow passage leading away from the sunken space. The passage was barely visible under the sand, but the stones beneath formed a clear line, a path worn smooth by countless steps. As I walked through it, the air felt cooler, more focused, as though the walls, now buried beneath the sand, still held the memory of shade. The passage opened into a small room-like space. I knelt and brushed away the sand from its center, revealing a small, round stone platform. It was polished, smooth, and slightly raised. A resting place, a quiet, private corner, a spot where someone once sat alone, thinking, breathing, listening to the wind. I sat on its edge, letting the stillness fill me. The soft glow of moonlight filtered into the space. The silence felt deeper here, sheltered by the shapes of the buried structures. I closed my eyes. The breeze moved gently across my skin. My breath matched its slow rhythm. The valley hummed with a calm so profound it felt like a lullaby. I rested there for what felt like a long time, breathing, listening, letting the peace of the lost city settle around me like a soft blanket. When I finally opened my eyes, the stars shone brighter than ever. The moon hung high, silver and steady. The valley lay quiet beneath me, its stones shimmering faintly with ancient memory. There was still one last part to explore, one final quiet space the city seemed to hold close, and I felt ready to walk toward it, slowly, gently, with the calm of the night guiding my steps. The moonlight deepened as I continued walking toward the quieter edges of the valley. The air had grown cooler now, carrying with it a faint, comforting chill that brushed gently against my skin. The sand felt different beneath my boots, lighter, softer, almost airy, shaped by the delicate breath of night. I moved slowly, letting the stillness settle around me. Each step echoed softly against the ground, merging with the quiet hum of the desert breeze. The city beneath the sand seemed to breathe alongside me, its presence gentle but unmistakable. Ahead, I noticed a faint ridge, barely a rise in the landscape, almost invisible in daylight, but now softly illuminated by the moon. Something about its shape felt inviting, as though the land itself wanted me to come closer. I approached with calm steps, pausing at the base of the ridge. The sand here formed a gentle slope, smooth and untouched. I knelt and pressed my hand into it. The grains parted easily beneath my fingers, cool and fine. Slowly, carefully, I brushed the sand aside. A flat, narrow stone emerged, its surface smoother than the others I had found. I brushed more sand away, uncovering the full width of it. The stone seemed to mark the entrance to something, perhaps a small chamber or a sheltered space preserved beneath the shifting dunes. I stood and followed the narrow stone with my toes, brushing more sand with the sides of my boots as I moved. The stone stretched further, straight, deliberate, leading deeper into the gentle rise. As I knelt again at its end and swept the sand away, a faint hollow revealed itself, shallow at first, then deepening slowly as the grains slipped down its slope. My breath softened as I brushed the sand aside with both hands. A carefully carved opening appeared, a quiet descent into the earth. It wasn't dramatic, not a cave, not a grand chamber, just a small, simple entrance, subtle, humble like the rest of the city. I lowered myself gently onto the sand and used my hands to clear more of the fine grains from the entrance. Beneath the surface, a small set of shallow steps emerged, carved directly into the stone, their edges softened by centuries. I felt a calm warmth spread through my chest. This was something special, something preserved, something the city had kept quietly beneath the sand. With slow, careful movements, I descended the first step. The sand sighed softly beneath my weight, shifting in a quiet cascade. The cool surface of the step pressed gently against the bottom of my boots. At the second step, I paused again and let my fingertips slip along the smooth curve of the stone. Cool, gentle, almost comforting. When I reached the bottom, the air felt slightly cooler, as though the earth was exhaling softly. The space opened into a small, rounded chamber, no bigger than a quiet room, silently carved out long ago. I knelt in the center of the chamber and brushed the sand away from the ground. Beneath it lay a single stone, perfectly smooth, gently convex, shaped with a care that felt almost affectionate. I ran my hand across the surface. The stone was slightly warmer than the others, perhaps a result of the heat it absorbed during the day. Its smoothness felt soothing beneath my palm. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. The silence of the chamber wrapped around me like a soft blanket. The coolness of the walls felt protective. The air tasted faintly of dust and time. For a moment, I imagined someone long ago sitting here at the end of a warm desert day, resting in the quiet, cooling air, letting the weight of the day slip softly from their shoulders. The thought eased something within me. It felt familiar, gentle, human. I opened my eyes and stood slowly, running my fingertips along the curved wall of the chamber. The stone felt smooth in some places, textured in others, shaped not by hands alone, but by the patient touch of centuries. In a shallow groove near the wall, I brushed away more sand and uncovered a small, carved indentation. It was the size of a hand, smooth and worn, perfectly shaped for someone to rest their palm. I placed my own hand there. The fit was natural, warm, reassuring. I let myself stay like that for a long moment, hand resting on the smooth stone, the silence surrounding me like a gentle hum, the cool air breathing softly around my skin. Eventually, I lifted my hand and stepped back toward the entrance. The moonlight filtered faintly into the chamber, illuminating a soft trail of silver across the sand. I followed it upward, ascending the shallow steps with slow, steady movements. When I reached the top, I emerged back into the cool night air. The sky stretched above me in a vast expanse of deep blue and shimmering stars. The moon cast a quiet glow across the valley, outlining the faint shapes of the city with delicate silver strokes. I walked toward the highest ridge of the valley, taking my time, letting each step settle softly beneath me. The sand shifted gently with each movement, flowing like warm silk. I reached the ridge and stood at its crest, gazing down at the city below. The entire valley glowed softly under the moonlight. The outlines of rooms, paths, platforms, and quiet spaces shimmered in the gentle night air. Everything felt peaceful, still, alive in its own quiet way. I breathed in deeply, letting the cool air fill my lungs. My heartbeat softened. My thoughts grew slow and warm. The lost city beneath the sand had shown me its quiet corners, its gentle memories, its softest hidden places. And now, as the night embraced the valley in a calm, soothing hush, I felt a profound sense of gratitude settle within me. I closed my eyes and listened to the silence, to the breeze, to the soft shifting of sand, to the heartbeat of the desert beneath my feet. I opened my eyes again, letting the moonlight shimmer within them. There was only one thing left now, the quiet ending, the final, gentle breath of the city's long, sleeping story. And I was ready to walk into it, calmly, softly, with the night guiding my steps. The night deepened gently over the valley, settling into a soft, velvety darkness that wrapped every dune and every buried stone in a blanket of calm. The moon hung steady above me, its pale light spilling across the sand like a quiet whisper. The stars shimmered in delicate clusters, their faint glow forming ancient patterns across the sky. For a long moment, I stood at the highest ridge, breathing slowly, letting the cool desert air settle deeply into my chest. The lost city lay beneath me, silent, peaceful, embraced by the night. It felt almost alive in its stillness, holding memories beneath the sand like soft echoes of a distant past. I allowed myself to stay there, perfectly still, listening to the hush of the night breeze as it drifted across the valley. A soft brush of air, a whisper of movement, a gentle sigh. The desert had its own rhythm, slow, patient, eternal. And tonight, it felt as though I had slipped quietly into that rhythm, moving in harmony with the land, breathing with the same calm pace as the valley itself. After some time, I stepped down from the ridge and walked slowly across the gentle curve of the sand. I let my fingertips drift lightly along the surface, tracing the faint rise and fall of the buried structures. The stones beneath the sand felt cool, steady, grounded, holding their quiet stories with patience. Every step I took felt softer than the last, as though the night itself cushioned my movement. The sand shifted in a slow, delicate wave beneath my boots, whispering in a language older than memory. The sound soothed me, carrying me deeper into the quiet heart of the valley. I walked toward the central circle I had uncovered earlier, the broad, rounded space that had once held gatherings and gentle conversations. The moonlight illuminated it softly, outlining the faint shape with a silver glow. I stepped into its center and knelt on the cool sand, pressing my palms gently into its smooth surface. The stone beneath me felt steady. The air felt calm. My breath came quietly, almost without sound. I closed my eyes. In the blanket of night, I could imagine the people who once lived here, moving slowly through their evenings, their soft footsteps brushing against the stone, their voices gentle against the quiet desert air. I imagined the way they might have gathered in this circle, sharing warmth and presence beneath the same stars I now saw above me. Their lives had not left grand monuments behind, not towering walls, not elaborate structures. Instead, they left traces, soft, subtle traces, woven into the sand like the residue of a long dream. And somehow, those traces felt more human, more tender, more deeply connected to the simple rhythms of life. I opened my eyes again, letting the moonlight settle gently into them. The valley around me felt still, so still that even the sand seemed to pause in its slow shifts, listening to the night. I rose slowly and walked toward the shallow steps that led into the small chamber carved beneath the ridge, the quiet underground room I had discovered in the last moments of the exploration. The entrance glowed faintly with moonlight. I stepped down carefully, letting the cool stone of the steps support my weight. Inside, the chamber felt even calmer, even quieter. The air was cool and soft, and the silence held a gentle depth that felt almost sacred. I knelt in the center of the room again and placed my hand on the smooth stone. A warmth spread through my chest, soft, slow, comforting, almost like the stone had been waiting for someone to touch it again after centuries of stillness. The chamber felt like a place for reflection, a place to breathe, a place to rest. I let my eyes close once more and allowed the quiet to settle over me completely. For a long moment, nothing moved. Not the air, not the sand, not even my thoughts. Everything melted into stillness, peaceful and unhurried. When I opened my eyes again, my breath had slowed to a calm, steady rhythm. I stood and ascended the steps, emerging once more into the open valley. The desert breeze greeted me softly, brushing past like a gentle hand. I walked slowly, deliberately, following the familiar curve of the stone pathways I had uncovered throughout the day. Each path felt like a thread connecting pieces of the city together, an invisible network of memories woven beneath the sand. As I reached the gentle slope near the heart of the valley, I sat down on a smooth stone and let my body relax completely. My shoulders softened, my breaths grew longer, my heartbeat settled into a steady, gentle pace. From where I sat, I could see almost the entire valley, the faint lines of rooms, walkways, platforms, and quiet corners etched subtly beneath the moonlight. Everything felt serene, balanced, timeless. I rested my hands on the cool surface of the stone and let my gaze drift slowly across the landscape. There was no drama in this city story, no tragedy, no grand fall, only time, only quiet, only the peaceful settling of sand over a life lived gently and simply. And as I looked across the valley, I felt the same stillness settling inside me, as though something deep within had finally found rest. A soft breeze moved through the valley, carrying with it a faint rustle of sand. The sound was delicate, almost like a lullaby. I leaned back slightly, closing my eyes once more. The stars shimmered faintly behind my eyelids. The moonlight warmed my face. The night whispered softly around me. My thoughts drifted like fine grains carried gently by the wind, slowing, softening, sinking quietly into calm. I breathed in. The cool air filled my lungs softly. I breathed out. The weight of the day melted away. I opened my eyes for a final look at the valley. The lost city beneath the sand rested quietly, unchanged, undisturbed, embraced by the tender night. I felt grateful to have walked through its quiet spaces, to have touched its stones, to have listened to its whispers, to have shared a moment in its endless sleep. And as I stood one last time on the soft sand, letting the night settle gently around me, I felt peaceful in a way I hadn't known before. The valley breathed, the desert sighed, the stars shimmered, and the city slept, wrapped in moonlight, waiting for the next quiet soul to wander through its dreaming silence. I turned slowly, taking a final, soft breath. Then, with steps as gentle as the shifting sand itself, I walked away, leaving the lost city to its peaceful slumber beneath the tender, shimmering night. For more calming sleep stories, you can subscribe anytime.